Thank you Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, I've been shooting film on and off for quite a few years now, but towards the end of last year, I really wanted to treat myself to a more premium 35mm film camera. Something that I could just carry with me every day, document my life with, and most importantly, just have fun with. And the only requirement that I had for this camera was that it had to be a rangefinder. I wanted that big, bright viewfinder, the quiet shutter, the beautiful looking body, and most importantly, just the small compact form factor that a rangefinder has. And at first, the usual suspects came to mind: the Leica M6, the Contax G2, and the Zeiss Icon ZM. And all of these are amazing cameras, expensive, yes, but very good and capable rangefinders. And just as I was about to pull the trigger on the Leica M6, I was chatting with my friend Faisal Westcott, and he recommended me a camera that I had never heard of before, the Konica Hexar RF, a fully electronic rangefinder released in 1999 by Konica Japan. So I did a bit of digging into this camera, and despite some mixed reviews, I decided to take the plunge and pick one up. And I found one on eBay for about $1,200 from Japan. And since then, I have shot a ton of film between California, Thailand, and New York City. And in this video, I want to talk about this beautiful little rangefinder, show you guys some images from those trips that I went on, and also tell you why I think this is truly the best 35mm rangefinder that was ever made. And before we jump into it, make sure to head over to my website and download my free travel photographer's toolkit, which has a bunch of essential resources, tools, and gear for photographers, including all the gear and accessories that I use for film photography. I recently added that in there. There's a link in the description. You guys can download that, and I hope you guys find it useful. Now, when I first got this camera, I was at home visiting family in California, and I very rarely go home to visit my family in the States. I live in Asia full time, so I was really excited to shoot some California vibes on film while I was there. And when I first took this thing out of the box, I was super impressed with the way that it felt and the way that it looked. It's nice and heavy, it has a really good weight to it, and although the Ken Rockwell review said that it was cheap and it was made of plastic, that's not true at all. This camera is beautifully built. The top and bottom plate are actually titanium. It's a really beautiful, smooth titanium, and it feels just really good in the hand. I love the weight that it has to it, and it doesn't feel cheap by any means. It's also not too big. It's just a really good balanced size. The dials are easy to access, and from a form factor perspective, I love the way this camera looks, and I love the way this camera feels. Now let's talk about some of the main features of the Konica Hexar RF. And I think the most distinctive feature that this camera offers is the fact that it's fully electronic. That means the shutter's electronic, the film advance and the film rewind, the meter, basically everything inside the camera is electronic except for manual focus. It requires manual focus lenses. It's a Leica M mount, so that's the only kind of mechanical feature on this camera. Everything else is fully electronic. But I think this is one of the main reasons why a lot of people are turned off by this camera, is because they want that fully mechanical film shooting experience. With a mechanical camera, even if that light meter breaks, you can still use it. You can still get it repaired. But with a camera like this, if the internals go, if the meter goes, then the camera is essentially a brick. It's gonna become a decoration on your desk at work. And that is something that I was pretty concerned about when I was first buying this camera. But over the years, I've realized that I really do enjoy shooting film on a more electronic camera. You know, I like the mechanical aspect, but I also like to be able to shoot with ease and have auto modes enabled and just simplify the shooting experience that's in front of me. And the Konica Hexar RF has a mode that made me fall in love with this camera from the get-go, and that is the AE and AEL mode. So AE is aperture priority and AEL is aperture priority locked. Now I love this AEL mode, and I'm shooting in this 99% of the time. I think I've shot in full manual like once or twice with this camera because I don't really see the point. The AEL mode works perfectly. All I have to do is point my camera at my scene, find the midtones or the shadows where I want to expose for that scene, half press my shutter, and then recompose and capture my image. And as long as I'm paying attention to my shutter speed, it's essentially the same thing as shooting in manual mode because you're still reading the same meter. And I just find that it's really easy and fun and efficient to shoot with. Now, the viewfinder on this camera is very good as well. And one of the most important things with a rangefinder is having a big, bright viewfinder that you can view your scene to. That's your connection from the camera to the outside world. And this was something that I was not sure about when I got this camera, because some people were saying, oh, it's not nearly as good as the Zeiss Icon ZM or the Leica M6, but I found it to be really nice. It's nice, it's big, it's bright. The viewfinder patch is sharp, it's really easy to use. The only issue that I did run into with the viewfinder is that your eye really does have to be quite centered in the viewfinder to get a correct reading. So if it's off-centered, you might not be able to see your meter, and also your rangefinder patch might look like it's out of alignment. But I got used to that pretty quickly, and I haven't had any issues with that since then. And in general, I find the viewfinder to be big, bright, beautiful, very easy to use. It also has an exposure compensation dial on the top of the camera, and I love this feature. I use this all the time, and it makes it really easy to over or underexpose your film. Instead of just calculating the stops manually or using the ISO dial to do that, you can just use the exposure compensation dial on the top of the camera, and it works really well. Now, the last feature of this camera that I think really helps it stand out from the others is the fact that it has a maximum shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second. And this makes it so easy to shoot with wider apertures in bright sunlight. If you're shooting a portrait during the day and you still want to use a wider aperture and you don't have an ND filter on hand, you can shoot with 1/4000th of a second, block some of that incoming light, and still capture a shallow depth of field in bright light scenarios. Whereas with the Leica M6, that's only 1/1000th of a second as the maximum shutter speed. And I think this is still also one stop faster than the Zeiss Icon ZM as well. So that's something that's really overlooked. And while typically when I'm shooting film, I do like to stop down and I'm shooting at 5.6, f8, or f11, I love that I can shoot wide open during a bright sunny day without having to use an ND filter. So that's a really nice feature that this camera has and makes it quite versatile in a wide range of scenarios. So I love the maximum shutter speed on this camera. But just to sum things up, I think the electronic nature of this camera really makes it the camera that it is. And it has so many features that many other cameras on the market don't have. And I think it makes this camera one of the easiest cameras to shoot film on, even if you're a complete beginner. But not all film cameras are easy to use. And when I was first starting out my journey with shooting film, I had no idea what I was doing, and I kept underexposing all of my images like I think a lot of beginners do. But luckily I stumbled upon a class on Skillshare by Kyle McDougall, a fellow YouTuber, which did a deep dive into 35mm film photography, and it taught me pretty much everything I know now about film photography and really helped me capture some of the photos that you guys are seeing in this video here today. And speaking of Skillshare, they are the sponsor of today's video. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard of Skillshare before because they are legends in the online learning community. But if you haven't, Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with a massive range of topics ranging from illustration, graphic design, music, marketing, productivity, and of course, photography. And speaking of photography classes, I've actually been teaching on Skillshare for over 7 years now, which is crazy to think about. And over those 7 years, I've posted 18 photography classes that cover a wide range of photography topics, including one of my most popular classes, Photography Essentials, which covers the basics of photography and how to use your camera and how to start taking beautiful photos. Now, I've also shared classes on landscape photography, portrait photography, photo walking, street photography, Adobe Lightroom, the list goes on. I've been sharing on Skillshare for many years now, so whatever specific photography skill you'd like to learn, chances are I have a class for it. And if not me, then one of the other thousands of teachers on the platform certainly will. But whatever skill you choose to explore, be it photography or productivity, Skillshare has designed custom learning paths with a list of curated courses that build upon each other and help you go from beginner to advanced in an easy to understand way. Now, Skillshare has been an amazing platform for me to both teach and learn on over the years. And if you're ready to invest in yourself and make strides towards your creative goals or your passion project this year, Skillshare is the best place to do that. And the first 500 people to use my link in the description of this video will get 1 free month to Skillshare, which means you can watch all of my classes, you can watch all the other classes, Kyle's class, or whatever you want. It's all there available for you. So make sure you click the link in the description to check that out. And thank you so much, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about lenses. And like I said before, this is a Leica M mount body, which means you can use any Leica M mount lens on this camera. Now, this is my first Leica M mount camera, which means I didn't have any M mount lenses when I first bought this camera. So I did a ton of research and I ended up settling on the Voigtlander 35mm f2 Ultron Mark II. And this lens has been a beautiful lens to shoot with so far. And all the reviews that I read online were speaking very, very highly about it. And I knew that I wanted to shoot with a 35mm lens because this is my preferred focal length. It's why I love the Fuji X100V and the Fuji X100VI so much. It's wide, but it's not too wide. It's very cinematic looking, and I just think it looks really good. So I knew I wanted a 35mm lens, and honestly, I think this is probably one of the best lenses on the market that you can get for the price. It rivals those of Leica's. It's sharp, it has a ton of character, and it's tiny as well. I think it just matches this body perfectly, and I love the focusing mechanism on here. It just feels so nice and smooth, and honestly, one of the main reasons why I love shooting with this camera so much is just the manual focus. It's just fun. I just am such a huge fan because I'm always shooting with autofocus when I'm shooting with digital. So with this, I just feel such a closer connection to the camera. But when Konica released this camera in 1999, they also released a series of Hexanon M mount lenses to go with this camera, and they look like beautiful lenses. There's a 28mm, a 35mm, a 50mm, and a 90mm. Now, I would love to get my hands on the 28 or the 50, but they were a little bit expensive when I was shopping around. But they do look like great lenses. They're very highly reviewed. They're super sharp, and they just look like epic little lenses. So I would love to pick up one of those, but if you can find one of those with this body, that's like the full set. That's the way to go. I would love to have a native lens on this camera, but I'm still very happy with the Voigtlander, so I can't complain. So the Leica M mount is a huge selling point for this camera, and honestly one of the main reasons why I decided to pick it up. But before we move on to some of the drawbacks that I did have with this camera, I want to show you guys some more photos from some of the trips that I've been on recently. Okay, but let's talk about the main drawbacks of the Konica Hexar RF. And the first one, of course, is the one that I mentioned in the beginning of this video, is that the fact that this camera is fully electronic. And like I said before, if this thing breaks, it turns into a brick, right? It's very hard to get fixed. And I did a little bit of research as to how I could get this camera fixed if it did indeed break. And I found myself in the depths of the analog photo subreddits on Reddit, and I found a few threads of people saying that they can get them fixed, and they had gotten them fixed in the past, but I don't think it's going to be easy. I'm gonna have to ship it somewhere, and it's gonna be very expensive and probably not worth the price tag it costs to actually fix a camera like this. But on the flip side, you know, when I was looking at the M6, one of the reasons why I wanted to buy that camera is because it's fully mechanical and I could easily get it repaired. But once I started reading about the repair process for a Leica M6, it didn't seem like it was all that easy either. I'd have to ship it somewhere. People weren't sure if Leica was still repairing the M6 Classic versions. And even if they were, the wait times were like 6 months to a year. So for me, it just wasn't worth it. I want to have a film camera with me all the time. So if it breaks, it breaks, whatever, that's okay. You know, I'll buy something else. I want to enjoy this camera while I have it, and so far I have. Now, if you go online and read about this camera, you'll also read about the viewfinder. And like I said before, you do have to have your eye quite centered on the viewfinder to get an accurate reading with the focus patch and in order to see your meter. And this was an issue for me in the beginning, but I only really think it's an issue if you're cognizant of it. If you pick up this camera and you'd never heard that before, you probably wouldn't even know that it's an issue. I find the viewfinder to be really big, really clear, really easy to use. And this was something I noticed when I picked up the camera, probably because I read all those reviews. But once you start shooting a little bit, you completely forget about this, and you'll find that the viewfinder is really, really nice on this camera. And lastly, I do think we need to discuss the price, and I paid about $1,200 for this particular body, but I got it in mint condition from a very, very good seller in Japan. And overall, you know, I think it was worth every penny that I paid for it. It's a beautiful camera and something that I am proud to have with me, and one that I really want to take care of as well. And I think if you are buying a camera like this, I would probably recommend spending a little bit more and getting something a little bit nicer, because if that camera has been dropped, you really don't know what the electronics are like inside. So far I've had no issues, and I'm really hoping that it stands the test of time. But overall, I really don't have many gripes about this camera. And even though it cost me $1,200, it was still half the price of a Leica M6, and it has way more features than a Leica M6 as well. I've captured some of my favorite film photos ever with this camera, and I hope you guys get the chance to shoot with one because it really is just a nice, fun, non-obtrusive shooting experience, which is exactly what I want when I'm shooting film. But that's all for this video, guys, and let me know in the comments down below if you want to see more film photography videos from me. I love shooting film, but I haven't made a video about film in quite a while now. I think the last one I made was where I was shooting with the Nikon FM2 in Bali during the pandemic. So if you guys want to check that out, I'll put it right here. You guys can go and watch that. That's a pretty cool video. But let me know in the comments down below if you want to see more film photography videos from me. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. And I will chat with you guys again very, very soon.